Approximately 1 in 5 people suffer from an autoimmune disease. An autoimmune disease is a condition arising from an abnormal immune response to a normal body part. There are at least 80 types of autoimmune diseases. The cause is generally unknown. Some autoimmune diseases, such as lupus, run in families, and certain cases may be triggered by infection or environmental factors. Some common diseases that are generally considered autoimmune include celiac disease, diabetes type 1, Graves' disease, inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and Hashimoto's. We recognize that you need some help if you are suffering from one of these autoimmune diseases. That is why we have created our therapeutic autoimmune program. The program is a 13-week program in which you'll have weekly check-in calls with your very own nutrition coach. Your nutrition coach will help you out with all things nutrition and lifestyle to help you better your symptoms. If you are suffering from an autoimmune disease, you do not have to do it alone. The team at The Chief Life are here to support you 100% of the way. You can find out more about the therapeutic autoimmune program on our website, www.thechieflife.com, and look underneath the nutrition tab. Guys, what is up? I just wanted to quickly let you know that we are now running free nutrition consults at www.thechieflife.com. You can book in for a quick 15-minute consult where we get to talk about all things nutrition, all things lifestyle with one of our fantastic nutrition coaches. So if that is something that you feel you are in need of, please jump across to www.thechieflife.com. Can't wait to see you guys booking in. Welcome to the Chief Life Podcast,
where we deliver guests and knowledge from around the world right to your ears.
Focusing on nutrition, exercise, health, and wellness.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
The Chief Life Podcast is powered by Athena. You can head across to athena.co and gain yourselves 20 hours of free work from a virtual assistant. A virtual assistant is someone who can do any of the work that you do recurring week in, week out. For instance, for me, it was palming off the editing and the producing of the podcast. So what I've done is I've got myself a VA, Lewis, he's incredible. And each week he comes in and I send him the audio and he puts all of these new sound clips behind it. He edits it all in place. He posts it up on YouTube. He posts it to the Libsyn, which is where we host our podcast. And I pretty much don't have to do anything from here on out, which is incredible. So you too can gain access to your very own virtual assistant by going to athena.co and using the code CHIEF, all in capitals. Guys, welcome back to the Chief Life Podcast. I'm Matthias Turner, and today I'm super stoked. I've got Dr. Michael Smith with me. Sorry, Smith. There we go. So why I stuffed that up is because I was going straight into website next and I was looking ahead. But Dr. Michael, welcome.
Hi. Should I call you Matthias or Matty?
Matty's fine. Matty is fine. Yeah, definitely. So your website, Integrative Health Solutions, you've got a podcast, which is Fusion Health Radio, which is a podcast where East and West medicines kind of meet, which is really cool. As well as you've got your book, Returning to an Ancestral Diet. So, I mean, you've got an awesome background. I'm really excited to dive into it. So maybe if actually you could kind of take us a little bit through your background, like tell us a little bit about your upbringing, Michael.
So I have a bit of a strange upbringing because I grew up in a hunting lodge, guest lodge, ranch in the middle of nowhere. We had a generator for electricity we would use once in a while. So I spent most of my childhood in the bush trapping, tracking, hunting, fishing, looking at trees and watching time go by because there was no way to get electricity, or this is back in the late 60s, early 70s. So, back then you didn't have satellite, so if you didn't have direct access to any kind of TV or radio, you were all by yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so using a generator, was it petrol run or was it a fire run one?
No, I think it was diesel actually, because we had guests come. So when we had a bunch of people there and, had to have the lights running, but most time if we didn't need it, you didn't need it and it was noisy anyway. So
Okay, and so your background, and I guess going into this a little bit more, you were raised by First Nations of Canada, right?
Well, I have two different tracks in my ancestry for Aboriginal people or indigenous people. So I was raised partially in that culture and cultural environment, and also in my family because of marriage and how everyone's I guess met each other. I have about half of my family is not white and half of my family is white. In
Okay.
the sense of the people I grew up around and in that way. So in my life, it's just sort of become kind of a default setting that, okay, I'm mixed race and this is my, kind of place in the world and all that. Although it's a funny story, but when I was really embarrassed about that, because it's not a great thing to be sometimes, I used to tell people I was part Chinese. Because I was a martial arts teacher and it actually went across better if people thought I was part Chinese. So that's embarrassing in a way, but I'm just bringing that up just because there's two sides to the Aboriginal coin. One is there's sort of a romantic idea around it, and two, there's about 500 years of, bones you're dragging around with you everywhere you go.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a crazy thing, something I've never actually had to deal with myself, of having to hide anything of my ancestry. So, I mean, maybe could you talk about that a little bit more? Like, what were the things that were happening, and why was it easiest just to say, hey, I'm part Chinese?
Racism. I've never been to Australia, although I would love to come down there because every time I see it, I just want to go, wow, I want to be there, breathe the air. But here in Canada, if you're what people call a reservation Indian or somebody who didn't grow up in a city and you weren't very well socialized, people basically just assumed you were on your road to being an addict, you were on the road to being a street person, you were on the road to basically living off the taxes of non-Aboriginal people because you were too broken to get your life together. So there was just that assault. When we first moved to the city, actually, my grandmother, who's the primary native part of my ancestry, she actually got us to curl our hair and tell people we were Mexican. But I was about 10 years old when that happened. When I told people I was Chinese, I was in my 20s, and it was just because I was teaching Kung Fu, and it was a lot easier than saying, oh yeah, I'm part native and have to deal with all that stuff, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually, I do have some Aboriginal family here in Australia, and so I'm pretty sure how it works is my mum's grandma, her cousin, left her partner and got with married an Aboriginal man, and so we've got cousins. I don't know how far removed they are. I think it'd be like third or fourth cousins, and I grew up with Eli, my cousin, who was he was, I think, 9 months older. And it was just kind of crazy, even in the 90s, going through and seeing some of that racial difference that was happening with me and him going around, just growing up in the streets, and some of the comments that he would get, and it would enrage him sometimes, the things that people would say, and I would always be there right by his side, like, hey, you don't say that. Like, it's just kind of crazy. I always thought it was just that kids were brutal, that kids had no filter, and that's why they were saying it. But what scares me is that it's still a thing in the world, that there is still parts of the world where there is still a lot of racism going on.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't become a martial arts teacher by accident. It's because once we moved to the city, it was being mixed blood. I got into fights with the kids that were full bloods, and then I got into fights with the kids that were not native. So learning to fight kind of became a thing, and I'm just sharing this because of what you just said about your second, third cousin there. Eli, I think you said Eli.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably similar in Australia as it is Canada. We're fairly similar cultures, I think. No matter what your race is, when you're going through earlier school and high school, we're all kind of in well, I wouldn't say a prison, but we're all kind of in this track where you're kind of stuck, and the racism is predictable, and the violence is predictable, and the social job you have to perform is pretty obvious and predictable. But once you're out of high school, unless you're going to college or you already have a trade or a job, being Aboriginal in most parts of the world basically means you're going to be lining up for welfare while you try and find a job where people aren't going to judge you because of your race. It's a lot better nowadays, but like 30, I mean, I'm in my 50s now, so yeah, about 30 odd years ago, I mean, it was just not good.
Yeah.
For getting most things done, in your life. So, and it's abysmal. Like, so many people I know that, I mean, most of the people I grew up with in high school are now dead, and they mostly died in prison.
That's
right. So it's just to say, like, you know, and I'm not into politics. I'm not trying to like point fingers at anyone here. I'm a man of peace, love, and healing, but I'm also a warrior, and I really want to speak to the truth that I hope we can grow up around that a little bit, you know, and maybe start asking cultures that are 50,000 years old what, you know, might be some long-term thinking, you know, with respects to cultures that are maybe a few hundred years old, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's just if you meet somebody on a bus and they're like, hey, I come from a 50,000-year-old culture, and you're like, oh yeah, mine's 200 years old. You want to have a conversation? You know, you kind of assume who's going to have maybe a deeper bit of wisdom to rely on sometimes.
I think with the racial discrimination that's going on, so many people become they become unattached to their background, to their ancestries, and I think that's why it's super cool and why I really did want to talk to you about what you know and what you have as a background, because you've kind of delved deeper into everything that is and was of your culture, and that's something that really excites me. I think that's absolutely incredible. When it comes to a lot of people, like I know Aboriginals here in Australia that you talk to them about, like I was talking to them about, there's a thing called a song line, and the song line is, so you'd be very familiar with this. It's the song that you sing when you meet a new tribe, and it tells your past and tells your ancestry of your tribe. And I told these Aboriginals about, like, hey, did you know anything about this? Can you tell me more about it? And they're like, no, sorry, we don't know anything of it. And it's because, I guess, somewhere along the way where racism kicked in too much, it was easier for them to say, like, I'm going to remove that part of me instead and try to become someone else, in inverted commas, instead of actually connecting myself to that, which I find is really upsetting. It's kind of crazy that that's the way that the world has gone.
I mean, the most upsetting part of that, I mean, I've had the benefit of, after I got over pretending I was Chinese, and, you know, I kind of got going in my mid-20s to sweat lodges and other ceremonies, and I've spent probably, you know, at least the last 20 years being raised up in a traditional way by elders and medicine people in those traditions. And, I mean, what vast, beautiful, caring, gentle wisdom. But to find people that are willing to teach you took me a long time, because when I first started looking for like a master in the sense of like Kung Fu or whatever, most of the elders that were Aboriginal here in Canada, you know, they kind of raise one eyebrow, and it's like, well, how long are you going to be around for? You know, are you going to take care of these people here, or are you just going to come and learn, you know, some sweat lodge songs and go away and try and become a fake, you know, hippie shaman or whatever? So there's a natural kind of care and protection, and it's also, you know, I apologize if this isn't, you know, a fun conversation, but I'm sure it will be in a minute. You know, for the last 200 years in Canada, they've been trying to kill every language and every part of culture from Aboriginal people that they could. And even in the late 60s, they had what they called the white paper, literally the white paper, where the mandate was to still abolish all language and all culture from Aboriginal people. Right. So and again, this isn't hopefully going to go too far into that, but it's just to be aware that, I mean, there's so few elders and medicine people in the world now, outside of maybe South America and Central America, that really, really remember. And it's so precious to find them. And I mean, there's such what people would call song lines from where I am. I mean, we actually call it singing the land. Because in those languages, there's a lot more verbs and moving imagery in the language than English. English is kind of like a production or commercial language in a way. Yeah. So when you're hearing an Aboriginal language, I mean, in your mind, you're seeing people coming over mountains and seeing the exact tributaries of water and understanding the north-south facing of the sun and the movement of air. So you know where the food is, where the sources of life are. So when you're telling these stories, you're also telling them how to live on the land.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so, I mean, for you, having that background, I mean, you've got a really interesting story in the fact that you were living from the land, and then as you started to grow up, you started to make your own decisions based around what you wanted to do with your food, and ended up getting sick from that. Could you kind of dive into that a little bit deeper as to what happened there?
Oh, yeah. So I can't remember exactly how old I was. I was in my maybe early 20s, and I had the good fortune to be studying with a very high-level martial arts master. And at a certain point in training, he kind of started pushing the vegetarian thing with respect to spiritual practice and what some people imagine maybe a higher level of energy and things like that. And I thought, wow, that sounds like right what I need to do. And, you know, I think I had spent most of that part of my life just trying to focus. just to keep myself busy. And I trained 6 hours a day for almost a decade with that guy.
Yeah.
So it was pretty serious. So I said, okay, I'll be a vegetarian. And unfortunately, I grew up on moose meat and berries and mushrooms and stuff. So my immune system, now that I know a hell of a lot more about it, and my digestive system and my epigenetics, were basically just saying, are you kidding? Tofu and brown rice every day? Or like, what kind of madness is this? And it eventually triggered Crohn's and colitis, and I actually ended up almost dying. I went from a 165-pound fighting weight as a martial artist to a 112-pound dying guy in the intensive care unit. In about 3 months. It took that long to just go.
How tall are you?
I was 5'8".
Wow.
I was a vegetarian for about 3.5 years, but when I started getting sick, it was like really fast, like crazy.
112 pounds. That's insane.
Yeah, it was. It was a near-death experience being that close to being dead.
And so, what changed?
When I just bowed my head to all the people in the hospital that gave me all the right drugs, because I was being a real stubborn dumbass by trying everything I could because I didn't want a colostomy bag. Yeah. And I was studying medicine at the time I was getting sick, and correlations there for stress and stuff, but I knew it was Crohn's or colitis probably 6 or 7 months before it got really, really bad. So I was trying to treat it in the way that I understood it, with lots of crazy herbs and acupuncture and other things. But autoimmune diseases have a lot more momentum, and subtle medicine has subtle momentum. So I eventually needed some really big, scary, like sledgehammer medicine when I was in the hospital. Yeah. So I'd put a lot of whatever statistic makes you comfortable, if you're listening to this, on the medicine. About the second night that I was in the ICU, and they'd given me 3 days to live because of blood tests and how like emaciated that I was or catabolic that I was, and they were doing everything they could to save me. But on the second night, I had this visitation from my grandmother, who's the native woman, and I'm completely, as a clinician, willing to say it was the pain-killing medication. Maybe I've seen ghosts in the past, maybe I haven't, but I don't literally need that to be true. I just had an interesting conversation with some part of my subconscious and or the spirit of my dead grandmother about shame, trauma, child abuse, and rage, and how I was holding all of that in my gut. And I didn't really understand what she was talking about because I was focused on fighting everybody. But it was about maybe 10 years later, I was doing ayahuasca with some people from Peru, and beautiful, powerful ceremonies. And then all of this memory came back of me being abused as a child, sexually abused. And why, again, I was so like hell-bent to fight anybody, like no matter who, how big or whatever, since I was a kid. And eventually I got to kind of like work that out, and it's still a part of like day-to-day life when you have those kind of memories. But I've spent most of probably the last 15 years focusing on PTSD and addiction and trauma as a part of autoimmune disease, because they're also interconnected. I'm finishing this one book I'm working on right now, but the next book I really want to write is about the connection between autoimmune disease, trauma, and addiction.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, autoimmune disease is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in this day and age. We're seeing it pop up. I think it's 1 in 5 people.
1 in 5, brother. Holy cow.
It's insane, right? Absolutely insane. And so, I mean, like there's all sorts of different disorders and different diseases that are popping out because of it. But there's a fair bit of, I guess, conflict around why it might be coming, why it might be happening. I guess one thing to talk about might be, what can we do if we get to this stage of autoimmune? Does it come to always being in hospital or not? And obviously, there's things we can do before we get to that stage, right?
Yeah, I'd say probably 60-70% of people are gradually diagnosed from repetitive visits to their regular doctor, and then they're referred to a specialist who will do more advanced testing or know what exactly they're looking at, because the inner workings of it are very, very complicated. One thing, it depends on what you want to get into, Matty, so it's up to you, but one of the easiest ways to really understand the autoimmune protocol or the whole autoimmune process is something that I've developed. It's called the autoimmune spectrum. So there's like 5 stages to how people get it. So if you want to get into that, we could.
Definitely. Let's touch it.
It's more about kind of like, okay, so basically this happens to everybody with an autoimmune disease in the sense of progression. And the the time between any of these things is up to the universe or people flipping coins or something, because it's very individual, but the process is not. For most people. So usually in stage 1 autoimmunity, you're going to see a lot of allergies and random reactions, random symptoms, often especially in children who have earaches and strep throat and get their tonsils out, or eczema or asthma. All of those things that are just sort of what we think of as kind of overall allergy-related, infectious-related conditions, again, mostly in kids, that are treated with antibiotics or steroids.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like a big warning sign. And the first questions I ask my patients once we sit down and basically get to know each other, these are the first questions. Were you born by C-section or breastfed? If not, that's not good. If you were born with eczema or asthma, that's really not good. If you had otitis media or really bad earaches where you needed antibiotics or tubes put in your ears, that's really not good. And I could go on and on and on, but just to give people a sense that there's like warning signs for autoimmune disease. And over 80% of my complex patients, when I ask them those questions, they answer about 4 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 of preclinical markers that are often just tossed off as kids stuff.
Yeah.
Right, instead of saying, well, maybe you should do something about that. So that's the stage 1, and it can start at any point in your life. I've had 40-year-olds show up who've been athletes, and now they're burned out, and their neurotransmitters are whacked, and their immune system is struggling, and they're having weird allergies and skin stuff or things like that. So the body tells us kind of at the beginning the same story, which is, hey, I'm pissed off about the environment and my skin and my guts.
Yeah,
we're fighting in a way that's not regulated. So the second stage is kind of more of a stubborn, tired situation where a person has chronic symptoms. They may have been diagnosed with something that I've just talked about, or something that's just a little bit more like IBS or insomnia or moderate depression or misunderstood versions of arthritis or things like that, where they're just sort of told, well, it's going to be chronic and you probably should take medication and go out of your way to find other support if you're willing to do so. And those people are what we would call pre-autoimmune or hidden autoimmune. And it really depends on the condition and their childhood. But if you see someone who's got chronic, inflammatory-based health problems, and their childhood is a high, checklist of all those kind of conditions, now you're talking to someone who's pre-autoimmune, not somebody with IBS and tendinitis or something like that.
Yeah.
When you're in stage 3, you have a fixed name autoimmune disease. You're being treated for it clinically, usually with immune suppressants, steroids, again, antibiotics, painkillers, and funny things to make your moods go, flatter, or at least not lower. And now because you're an autoimmune patient, it makes more sense to start getting into the protocols for autoimmunity. Stage 4 is when you have more than one autoimmune diagnosis. So now it's complex autoimmune. And those people, it's the minimum 2 years to basically sort stage 4 out. And stage 5 is when the clinicians have told you that because of your age or because of the extremity of the disease, that you should get your affairs in order, because it's now a morbid or terminal process, which can take years or months depending on what's happening. So that's sort of the step-by-step process that I've been seeing. And I mean, I wish I had like 25 more years of practice, because this is about my 25th year, and I think I'm just starting to understand what I'm doing.
That's
and I'm not saying
insane.
that to be like shy. I'm not making some passive-aggressive hint here. I'm just saying like, no, I think I really am starting to get good questions.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it is such a big thing that we need to unravel, really. But I mean, at any stage of this, say, for instance, they've gone through stage 1, there's things that they can do to unravel and make sure that they're not going to step through stages 2, 3, 4, and 5. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. So stage 1 is usually a 3-day fast and 28 days on what people call an AIP or an autoimmune protocol.
Yeah.
They don't usually have to take it as severely as some processes or protocols you might get into. But it's a minimum 28 days of no garbage, no caffeine, alcohol, sugar, no grains, beans, nuts, or seeds, and all that kind of stuff. Usually I recommend meditation, sensory deprivation tanks, breath work. If they practice some kind of Qigong or yoga, then we try and use that as a way to keep a felt sense relationship with the body. I mean, the research I'm doing right now really has to do with epigenetic signaling around what's called loss of self-tolerance. which is the actual clinical description of autoimmunity.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to always get people to recognize in stage 1, I don't tell people I think you have an autoimmune disease unless I'm convinced and I'm trying to get their attention, which I have, but not very often. The thing is to just like let people know, whatever you can do to have a really good connection with yourself somatically, with patients, with, just giving your default mode network in your brain a chance to talk to you for an hour a day or something through basic meditation. Even if, everyone spends a couple of years in hell when they learn to meditate just listening to themselves talk, but you kind of need to do that for your brain to actually get over itself.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's like instinctual physiology. It's not like there's something wrong with you if you're sitting there listening to yourself talk. Your brain just hasn't finished. It's like a kid who wants to tell you a story. It just needs to tell you the story until you laugh the right way.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I've never heard it that way. We've actually just recently launched a 12-week program, which is an ARP program, so Autoimmune Protocol, and pretty much we've got this new nutrition coach on, Beck Breeds, who's absolutely incredible, and this is her realm, and it's kind of everything that she delves into. So she's like, hey, I really want to start a nutrition program through you guys, 12 weeks going through where we literally cut your diet back to basics and then support you through it, because sometimes the hardest thing is actually just sticking to it. Like, people just get to the stage where even though they're sick, they just find it so hard because it feels like they are so far removed from everything and everyone. Whereas realistically, if you can change your mindset around it of like, hey, this is the way I'm going to heal myself, and by doing these other things that are seen as normal, they're going to take me further back. Like, it's just nurturing that support, having that nurturing support that is making a big difference for people that we're seeing going through the program.
Yeah, and group contact is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you said, the hardest part, is both of us know, is you put people on a no everything diet, which means a no hanging out with your friends diet, and a no date night, usually like no freak out night, diet, or no potluck diet, or whatever. People suddenly feel trapped by it.
Yeah.
So everything that can avoid isolation, especially people who have experienced trauma and are naturally geared towards sort of self-isolation and, self-recrimination, being put on that kind of protocol just gives them more, a self-evident truth that I deserve to be stuck by myself with some kind of mysterious dilemma. So it's always like the first most important thing is, okay, let's make sure that we're doing something, even if it's, at the worst distance would be like a private Facebook group where people could share recipes and talk to each other. But live interaction, either through a screen or obviously with people, is something we need. And nowadays we're so caught up in the screens that there's actually a structure in our brain and in our spinal nervous system that's degrading every decade that we get more addicted to screens. And now it's like 16 hours a day. So, that's not good, especially for kids.
No, yeah, exactly. Exactly right. That's insane. So, you did mention a 3-day fast before when it comes to stage 1. What does the fasting do before you go on to something like an ARP protocol or autoimmune protocol for eating style? Like, obviously, it gives your body a chance to kind of stop, reset, get rid of some of the junk that's in there. Is there anything else that happens during that fast?
Yeah, so about 75% of the reactive frontline part of your immune system resides in your GI tract. And it's sometimes imagery is really helpful for people. Most people are actually visual learners. So you've probably heard this statistic, but if you were to stretch the small intestine membrane out the way you would if you were to tan a hide, I don't know if people have ever tanned a hide, but just you stretch it out like a cover over your pool.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'll remember that one. It's about 3,000 square feet.
Which is insane.
Right. So every 4 days, you have to rebuild 3,000 square feet of endothelial tissue in your small intestine, which is 75% of your immune system's location of activity reading the world. If you're having an autoimmune disease, you're almost always going to have a leaky gut, which means you're literally crapping food and bacteria into your bloodstream, your liver, and your brain. So I'm pretty sure that's clearly not a good idea. Right? But if you fast for 3 days, or just do a broth fast or something with a lot of trace minerals in it, or your traditional bone broth, you're not signaling the front line of your immune system to react to any of the typical antigens that are going to make it more upset. And again, weird imagery, but I say this probably 20 times a week, with people. You're training a puppy. The puppy was abused as a child. Your immune system is a very angry animal. You need to take the time and spend the time with it every day to reorient that animal's relationship with the world, or it's going to keep biting you. You can't just give it vitamin D in the morning and tell it to just sit and then go and do whatever the hell you want all day and come back till like it's 7:30 in the morning and there's a dog sitting there chewing on what? You. Right? So that 3 days minimum is to actually give that whole front line of your immune system nothing to chew on, nothing to react to. And that intention, every time you decide not to go to the fridge, not to open the cupboard, not to, bail on yourself in a way, is that affirmation of the opposite of losing self-tolerance, because now you have to gain self-tolerance as your monkey mind jumps up and down on a barking immune system dog while you try and just calm down and not quell your feelings and emotion and stress with something in your mouth. So it's like a rite of passage for modern humans, because I've done pretty extended fasting, so for me it's like a almost sensual celebration of being. The first time people do a 3-day fast, it's like being punished and tortured, because if you've never experienced what's going to happen, it's like taking acid for the first time. You're afraid of what's going to happen next because you don't know, and if it's getting weirder, humans are great at predicting, right?
Yeah.
So people are going to predict it's just going to get weirder.
Oh, that's great. I've never actually done a really prolonged fast. I do a heap of intermittent fasting. I've done a heap of 24-hour fast, but outside of that, I've never actually looked that much into it, purely on the fact from my head, I was always like, it's too disruptive from what I do. But I mean, that's probably the worst excuse you could use when it comes to it.
I think all excuses are equal.
No, that's a good point.
It's like all trauma is equal. Neither of them is going to get you really that far, though. Honestly, man, Matty, I'll throw this out there. Can I just be like a bit shamanic for a sec?
Yeah, please go for it.
When your child is going to be around 6, 7, 8 years old, you're going to start noticing that they're noticing some stuff that's going to challenge you as just an adult.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, go off somewhere and do a 10-day fast. And maybe get another tattoo that commits to a different kind of stillness and patience.
I don't really know where to go from there. I wanted to ask, I guess, what reason would you do a 10-day experience where you're fasting and getting away from everything?
Well, I mean, if I was to be, I guess from a scientific point of view, just to flip gears, when you look at all ancient cultures, they all have periods of time where you go into a cave, into a dark space, into an alone place with either certain medicines you take, or you fast, or you sing, or I don't know if you've heard about sun dancing. It's pretty intense what some people do.
Yeah.
But it's basically deciding that you really have to make sure you're upgrading your inner hard drive experientially, so that as experiences become more challenging, you're the warrior who has faced the younger version of you, and now you're a more wise version of you.
Guys, I'm interrupting this program to let you know that we have our optimal scorecard available at www.thechieflife.com/scorecard. This is where you can find out how you stack up on our 7 pillars. This is a little lifestyle approach that we have. So life is not just about nutrition. Getting results is not just about nutrition. There are other lifestyle factors that come into play. And this scorecard lists it out for you. You get to score where you're at compared to where you want to be. It gives you a little stepping stone to get from where you are to where you want to be. So head across to www.thechieflife.com/scorecard, and we look forward to seeing you log in your scores. So is it kind of like doing, say, for instance, a rite of passage? So it's something that a teenager might do coming into manhood. They might do, say, a rite of passage. Is that something that this would essentially be in manhood instead?
Yeah, I mean, that's what most cultures have. You're 14, 15 years old. They're going to put you in certain situations for many, many reasons. And then as you become an actual man in your late 20s, early 30s, you're going to go and do something harder. If you want to become taken seriously in your mid-40s as an actual mentor for your community, then you're going to have to go and do something even harder. And in your mid-60s and 70s, you're actually just going to be given a big feast to to be celebrated as an elder because you don't really need to do anything harder. You're in your 60s and 70s. But in some Aboriginal cultures, there's 4 puberties, and you have to go through the puberty and prove you're the next kind of you, or you're still just an adolescent.
Yeah, I've heard about this before. So the 4 puberties, they kind of talk about like 4 different stages of life, right? Like every 15 years or so, you've got an upgraded version.
Well, that's up to you and how much you're willing to let go of.
Okay.
So here, I'll do this really quick. So let's say me, you, and Eli, we're all 14-year-old young men booting around wherever you grew up, Queensland, I think, and we're getting into the trouble we're getting into. And then say maybe Eli's, grandpa comes along and invites us young men to go and, maybe take ourselves a little bit more seriously and go on walkabout a little bit. Not like seriously big walkabout, but maybe, just go and get to know yourself. The most important thing about that is the person you are when you go cannot choose who you're going to be when you get back, or else you just defaulted the whole thing, right? So there's a thing, astrology in the West, they talk about Saturn return.
Yep.
So around 28, you're supposed to like have this Saturn thing. I don't really know much about it, but
so I think
that's usually when.
Regarding to Stace, I'm pretty sure that's actually just happened again. The Saturn return, in regards to the actual cycle of it, has just happened this year, I believe.
Right. So that's the beginning of, from a traditional cultural point of view, your second puberty. So and a lot of people between 28 and 32 go a little bonkers because you're going from a social orientation of I fit into this group because I'm into this to I have to find out how to be me in any group at all. Regardless, because now I'm a grown up and I have to be able to show up and get stuck in elevators and go to board meetings or solve weird problems with people I don't know very well, and I can't just like them by default because of their clothing and music preferences and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's what, in the modern culture, we don't really have anything like that anymore. So and this might sound a bit bitchy, but in my opinion, coming from where I grew up, we live in an adolescent shopping mall. It's like there's no grown-ups really. No. Look at politics, especially in the West. I mean, so I mean, you're just like, okay, well, here we are.
I've actually always had a real big fascination. So something that we have as a big goal for ourselves is to eventually have our own farm space and have our own retreats where we bring people to, and something we already do is running retreats, but we'd love to eventually one day own our own and have people come and do retreats often. But something that I want to throw in there is actually like a rite of passage to some extent. And so it's definitely something that I've started looking into a lot more. It's something that I've had a big desire to do myself. And recently, I've actually taken up bow hunting. I haven't talked about it much on this podcast, to be honest, because there is people that listen that are vegans and vegetarians. And I guess the reason why I go after it is because of the state of the natural food that you can get a hold of. But it's so true about what you just said, that the man you go in compared to the man you go out and you come out as is you can never choose what's going to happen. And if you try to control it too much, everything just comes undone anyway. Like, you learn so many lessons from 2 or 3 days out in the bush. It's absolutely crazy. And to be honest, I haven't been that successful as a bow hunter yet. Like, yes, we've eaten food from the land, which is awesome, but what's been the biggest thing for me so far is the mindset shift that I've got from doing that.
That's amazing. I really, if I ever get rich somehow, man, I would love to come to Australia and help you guys with a retreat center, because that's what I want to do here as well. Because that's what we all need, is a place to go and to move into a healing space, or a sacred space, or a transformational space like a rite of passage. And you'll get there with bow hunting. It's the hardest thing. Like, start with a crossbow if you want to get fed.
I would have started with a rifle if I really wanted to get fed.
There you go. That's more honor to you if you're actually going to stick it out with a real bow. Definitely.
No, I mean, like, I've got 2 bows. So one's a recurve, which is more like your old school style, and I've got the compound, which is the newer, I guess, more technology that goes into it type of bow. And I'm using that, and I've got access to deer, and my big goal is to get myself a deer. And so far I've had some goats and some hares and bits and pieces, and that's been incredible. Like, just actually eating that food. It's food that to start with, like it might sound a bit weird if you were to talk about in Brisbane City, where I come from. If you say, hey, I'm going to go and shoot myself a hare and eat it from the land, people would be like, oh, that's a bit weird. But realistically, it was absolutely delicious. Like it's crazy. It kind of made me really think about how we're going to cook and really go about it in a different way. And not only that, but it also fills me with a lot of pride or joy. I don't know if that's the right words to say, but when we are sitting down to eat a meal of something that I've been able to take from the land, I don't know, it just has a different feeling to it, rather than just buying a packeted piece of meat from Woolworths or Coles, which is our supermarkets here.
Can I do a little philosophical thing on that?
Yeah, definitely.
So there's three beings in every being.
Mm-hmm.
There's an instinctual being, a social being, and an existential being. And I often describe it as a cowboy on a horse with binoculars.
Yeah.
Right? So the horse is your body, your instincts, your sex drive, all the stuff that we actually just naturally identify with horses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your cowboy is the one who sings musics about, I don't know if you guys ever hear cowboy music in Australia, but it's kind of sentimental music.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think of it that way is that that's our emotional self, the part of us that's really instinctually driven to have good connections and belonging. Because without that, you're kind of a sick animal in the sense of a primate, because you need a group of people or you're, not doing so great.
Yeah.
And then there's the existential self, or the binoculars, which is the way each of us looks at the world in a focused way towards the distance and the meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So as people get healthier, and I've seen this training martial artists and athletes for longer than I've been doing medicine, as people get healthier physically, and you could blame neurotransmitters, you could blame hormones or whatever, they become healthy enough that they want their existential life and their binoculars to mean something authentic to them.
Yeah.
So some people go vegan or vegetarian, some people go carnivore, some people become bow hunters. But the reason I bring it up is that we're all trying to get something existentially right for ourselves. And that's the healthiest thing you could do once you've taken care of your gut immune system and, getting off the couch and stop eating crap. Because that's what happens to everybody, is you start to wake up, not in some woke, fake sort of social sense of being better than people, but you just start going, I need to see through myself and into the world in a way that feels authentically true to me. And when you're always distracting yourself with the stuff that most people who don't take care of themselves are distracting themselves with, you don't care.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging people who are needing that kind of, if you're there, you're there. It's time to get off the couch. But just to recognize when you're standing beside a vegan, the two of you have a choice, is to fist bump because you're existential warriors trying to come to a right place in yourself authentically in the modern world, which is a friggin' shopping mall. Makes it harder, right? Or you're pissed off at each other because you chose different ways to meet that part of yourself.
Yeah.
So that's usually what I do. I say, want to fist bump about being spiritual warriors, or you want to argue over biochemistry? And I'm pretty sure I'll win. So.
Oh, that's great. No, it's actually very interesting, the amount of people that we've seen change their complete life around. So obviously within nutrition, they start to change their life. And then once they've gone through it and they've actually, like you said, get off the couch and they start eating good food and their gut starts to heal, the amount of people that we've seen shift in their career paths is massive. Like I would say almost like 3 of every 10 people who come through and do nutrition coaching with us, they come and eventually they're like, well, you know what, this isn't my greater purpose, or this isn't my passion right now. I want to shift and start transitioning to that. And I've got a really good example of a guy recently, and he was 160 kilos. So what's that? Whoa. Like he was a big boy, 380 pounds, something like that. Yeah. Like he was a big boy. And he lost a lot of weight before he came to us, which was incredible. And he kind of came to me and said, hey, look, I need just that last little shift in weight. I'm actually going to do nip and tuck. I want to get rid of all the excess skin that I've got. And we dropped him in a healthful way compared to what he was eating, in a really healthful way. The last few kilos, like we did 12 kilos with him, and his skin started to naturally just change anyway, like it started to tighten up itself. But in this whole process, since he's now got to the stage where he's really happy with his physique and his lifestyle and how he's actually stepping into his daily life, how much confidence he's got, he's now transitioning into becoming a personal trainer himself because he wants to help people who are just like him. And whether that's, I don't know, I think that's just a really cool example of someone who's gone through it. And I think that's the same thing with a lot of doctors actually, is they go through a sickness stage and then they're like, well, I want to help people through that stage. At least some of the good doctors, I'd say.
Does that fella have a YouTube channel or anything?
He doesn't. I think he has been actually doing video blogs himself, and it's something that he's too nervous to release just yet, but it's something that he would like to do.
Okay. Well, maybe if he ever hears this, or you end up chatting and you mention me in some way, I would love to put his story through my social media just for people to go, holy cow, humans are amazing.
Yeah, cool. I actually talked to him tonight, so yeah, I'll talk to him again about it for sure. All right.
Yeah, we're all on the same journey. It's just amazing people to actually see people do it, and it's not surprising to me that the end effect of getting well is wanting to take care of people. For me, that's like, grasshopper, now you are wise. You can. Oh yeah, sorry, that's from a TV show from like 100 years ago. Right. So yeah, but it's just to honor people, for the fact that, I mean, that's actually I think a human instinct is just to tend and befriend. It's in our instinctual nature to take care of each other.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, something that I really wanted to bring you on for, and I think there's so much insight and there's so many different directions we could really head with this. But I really would like to bring it back to the plant and animal-based medicine stuff that you kind of grew up with, and things that you still utilize. Like obviously with Chinese medicine, there's a lot of different herbs that get used for different sorts of remedies. But when it comes to the plant herbs and plant medicines that you used when you were growing up, can you specifically remember anything that was, I guess, of major resource for you guys as you were growing up?
Not medicinally, no. I mean, there's probably grandma folk herbs being boiled on the stove or something, but it was a wood stove. So I was just picturing it in my head. It was this giant wood stove. Anyway, no, mostly, I mean, I remember eating wild mushrooms and wild foods and berries and all the stuff that you'd just go out and find, because if you didn't, you were, well, not going to go. It's not going to be a good winter, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't really get into learning actually Aboriginal medicinal plants until I was probably 2 years into practicing medicine. Because I didn't really meet anyone who was really deep into those traditions who was willing to share it with me. I mean, there's lots of books out there and stuff, but it took me a while to find like a really good source for that.
Yeah.
And most of those medicines are used mostly in a ceremonial healing way, not just, take this for the common cold and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could get into some of that, but then we're basically talking about indigenous ceremonial practices. And that's something that some people get really kind of uncomfortable about, because there's people who take that stuff from podcasts and from blogs, and then they go and try and start their own little kind of pretend a wannabe shaman cult kind of thing.
Fake shaman, like you were talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, I could get into a few things. I just always want to preface that karmically, if you're taking more things than the entire world from Aboriginal people and you just want to keep taking more, you're just an asshole. So please stop.
I love that. That's good. I mean, maybe if we could just talk about maybe some of the most used herbs within, say, some of these practices, then some of these ceremonies. What are the typical ones?
Well, talk about the stuff that's everywhere, because then I don't feel like I'm gonna have some grandmothers come to my door and hit me on the head with a kitchen pot or something. So the four main medicines that are used in just sort of lifestyle practice for people would be sage, tobacco, cedar, and sweetgrass. And those are just kind of across most of North America. They're kind of those plants. The more farther south you go, the more you get into cactuses and cacao and obviously things like ayahuasca and stuff. Yeah. And those medicines go completely in different directions. Whereas with, say, sage, it's used in a very specific context. And I'm just going to, I don't know, part of me doesn't want to correct the fake shamans, because it's fun to watch them like just spew out nonsense, but there's also a part of me that just doesn't want people to spew out nonsense. So sage clinically or technically or traditionally isn't used to protect you.
Which would what they sell it as, right? Like a smudging stick.
Well, smudging is an action. It's not a defend yourself from invisible bad guys. Right? Because, I mean, although interestingly enough, when you actually look at biomedical research on sage, it'll wipe out 97% of the microbacteria in a space for a few days. So it's like, wow, that's interesting. Why people would keep doing something without knowing that fact. But when a traditional person is burning sage, we're using it to basically clothe you in your ancestors so that they'll come close to you. Right? Now, in our languages, we don't have a lot of nouns. So when I say ancestors, I'm not thinking about a bunch of dead people like, cartoon characters standing behind you, although sometimes that helps people think and relate to that part of life. From an Aboriginal point of view, ancestors are all of the living kind of conscious and unconscious memories that are coming through the center of your chest every day. Because that's your guts and your the part of you that's going to deal with the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you. Because whatever your ancestors went through in their lives, that's in you. And it's the way it's described is it's actually centered in the center of your chest. And it's interesting, in Chinese medicine, this is rarely even talked about anymore. There's an area of energy we call zongqi, which is ancestral energy, which is in the center of your chest. So two cultures from completely different parts of the world have the same sense that that's where you feel ancestoring through you. Because everything that got them through whatever they had to get through to get here, to get you here, is in you. It's just in you there. And if you want to call them to help you find yourself there, you use sage to wrap yourself in their experience and their memories and their teachings and their good days and bad days. And that protects you because now you're aligned with all of the people who are still alive in you because they didn't die at 2 years old or they fought off a bear or, whatever, badassery they did to keep going, right?
Yeah.
So it's learning to feel your inner mojo and mindset. Right, and sage is a ceremonial act of actually wrapping yourself in their influence and kind of calling them and say, I'm sure you're busy where you are right now, but I could really, any kind of nudge, any kind of good dream later on today, anything like that would be good.
That's absolutely insane. That's there's a lot of things I want to touch on there. I bizarrely enough, so I've got a native sleeve done, and one of the things I have
beautiful link,
is
man.
Thank you, is a sage bunch right there. Yeah. And I asked for the sage bush, not really knowing a heap about it. I just knew that there was something for it, and I just really wanted it. And recently, this is quite a bizarre thing. Recently, everything's just been a bit full on. So Stacey stepped out of the business. I've kind of taken on a lot more. And life was just getting very full on. The gym owners went away. And so I was also working at the gym twofold, or actually more than twofold than what I usually do. So my weeks went from going just a regular week to being days where I was up at 4 a.m. and getting home at about 8 p.m. And one morning I was driving home. It was a Monday morning driving home. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning or 8:45. I was driving and I was it was probably about 200 meters from home. And the last thing I remember is seeing a little street just before our street and all of a sudden gone. And I woke up, next thing, dragging my ute along the side of someone else's ute. So I literally woke on impact as we hit, and it ripped my front wheel off, ripped my whole front of my car. Like we pretty much nose tapped on the corners. And as we hit, I just ended up dragging my nose all the way across the road. And it's a complete major road. Like it could have been a lot worse than what it was. And pretty much there's two parked cars and I ended up between these two parked cars, and realistically hitting this guy was literally, I think, what saved my life, based on what else was around, and pretty much I could have, if I didn't hit him, I would have either hit a telephone pole or gone straight into a set of units, which is absolutely bizarre. But that day, I definitely feel like someone was looking over me with how it all played out. And now that you say that about the sage bush, I almost feel like that is, and this might sound completely bizarre to some people, but I almost feel like that is something that I've always had close by me, is people looking after me. And that day was definitely like a really big wake-up call for me. Like I'm so grateful to be alive right now because of everything that happened that day. And just, it was a really big lesson as to, hey, you need to stop, you need to slow down. Like there's a lot of life that's about to happen around you with the baby coming and everything else, but there's so many extra things to be grateful for, and you don't need to be 100 miles an hour all the time to be successful. Like what's successful is actually having the time to be with your family and having the time to do the things you want to do, and not always looking so far into the future, looking through those binoculars like you were talking about with the cowboy. But that was just then, like, I almost got a little bit emotional when you were talking about the sagebush, due to that. It's almost like it was my protector on everything that has happened recently in my life.
I will keep it around, man. And do you guys have sage there, or is
yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it grows, the same plant grows there or not. So I would assume it does because of the TV shows I've seen in Australia, but didn't want to be presumptuous. So I just want to throw this out there because we're having a bit more of an intimate conversation about this. From a traditional perspective, it's a good idea to go and make some offerings when stuff like that happens. Especially when you got new life coming and you kind of bumped into the focus on life kind of message. Yeah. You know, like, I don't know where you live, but if you live close enough to where there might be, I don't know, small animals and stuff, then you put an egg out in your yard.
That's interesting. How about offerings, for instance? So this is intentional offerings, but we've got a vegetable garden that keeps getting done by possums. Like, obviously it's not something that we've freely offered up, but it's not something I'm typically stopping either, because they're eating all that tomatoes.
I know. Just once in a while say, you're welcome to the possums.
Yeah, that's so bizarre. That's really cool. So, I mean, something that you've written is a book called... sorry, I've just lost my page right here. So it's called Returning to Ancestral Diet. Returning to Ancestral Diet. Let's talk about some of the differences between an ancestral diet and a modern diet, and what's missing from the modern diet. Why do people go so backwards on a modern diet?
There's sort of two directions to that. Just give me 1 sec. Sorry. There's two directions with that. One is that if you're eating something that irritates your immune system and makes it that proverbial angry puppy, that's what your body's doing with your calories. Is it's fighting off an invisible infection and invisible battles that are triggered by foods that really aren't meant for humans, or ratios of different kinds of starch. Obviously, I don't know what the statistics in Australia are, but I think the last time I checked in the US, it was 156 pounds of sugar per person per year. Like, that's enough calories for about 3.5 months.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just like, okay, well, how can you not be obese if you're eating 3.5 months more calories than you actually need to live? Right? From a toxic, supply of calories. I'm not picking on the US here, but they just have the worst statistics for health.
Yeah.
When you divide the number of people of drinking age in the US by the number of alcohol servings sold per year, every adult over 18 years old or 21 years old or whatever the age is there has to drink 3 servings of alcohol a day.
Wow.
Right? So I'm just using that as like an average, because for some reason we all seem to think the States has got something figured out. But anyway, that's just, you're just hurting yourself. And then there's GMO, weed, and then there's eating cow dairy that's from an animal that's being given the same drugs an autoimmune patient is given. Because all cows living on corn and soy have an autoimmune disease, the same way humans who live on soy and corn get autoimmune diseases, which is why they're on steroids and antibiotics, as well as to make them fat. Right? Yeah. So it's just like, now you're eating the sickest version of food if you eat the meat, but you're also getting that and all the fat from the dairy. So I would just say, from the look behind you bad ideas, you have to get away from all that stuff, or everything you're doing to get well is up against things that are clinically and statistically not going well for anyone. Just look at the stats in the US.
Yeah,
definitely. I think over half the people there are obese, and it's 1 in 2 are almost diabetic, and it's just it'll be 1 in 2 with cancer in about 5 years. So just an FYI, well, that's the petri dish you want to watch, because that's where it's going badly.
Yeah.
When you look in the other direction though, and you go say, okay, well, what actually would work? You have 2 choices, right? One, get really, really existential, like a diet that ends in ism. Whatever it is, it could be raw foodism, veganism, vegetarianism, paleoism. If it's an ism, you're doing something else. But that's coming from that kind of hypermanic place, right? I got to solve my problems, and it's got to mean something, instead of I got to learn how this works, and then I'll figure this out. So when you're trying to make some good decisions, it's been my experience that when you really look at human evolution and what obviously hasn't made people worse, it's all of the food that got us here. And if you go all the way back to the ice ages 2 million years ago, when we were primates learning to swim because our forests disappeared from a lack of rain for 10,000 years, we learned to eat fish. And then we learned to scavenge and bash bones apart. Then we learned to follow ravens and coyotes around to find food. And that's in my people's oral tradition, is just how to get through your, day of work. Right? Because most of my ancestors were literally hunter-gatherers up until like 1932, at least in one side of my family. So
yeah.
So there's kind of the proof in the pudding that those diets don't make people sicker, and the belief that the people only live to like 35 years of age. I mean, that may have happened in medieval Europe when people were living next to us, like pigsties and stuff like that. But when you talk to cultures that celebrate people in their 60s and have multiple stories about how amazing people are when they're in their 70s and 80s, that kind of means that 35 wasn't your average age of dying, right?
No, yeah.
And that whole life expectancy thing is actually based on the fact that over, I think it's 60% of kids died before they were 4. So when you say how many people were born and how many people live to 100, that's going to throw your math way off, right? So again, there's that's just an aside, but just for the people who keep thinking, but those bad diets, you only lived to 35 and it was horrible. I'm like, really, that whole slow down and think about it and learn thing really would be a good idea. Because that's what we're here for, right? But anyway, so when you look at wild game, fish, poultry, and things like that, and the rapidity of how their tissue turns into the healthiest entryway into our cells, our brains, our livers, our vascular system, to actually make positive changes in the body, that's not like a disputable thing. I mean, it's funny when they keep trying to test red meat for cancer, they keep using the worst cooking method that by itself would cause cancer if you're eating anything cooked that way, right? So it's just like, we're, again, not doing much thinking here. So it isn't about that. It's also more about nose to tail and eating more connective tissue.
Yeah, using your broth, using your cartilage, using, everything you can get from it.
Oxtail soups and making some pate, and the number of plants you need really depends on what your digestive system and your microbiome are up to. So it isn't like there's a prescription for everybody. It's like, okay, let's find the appropriate ancestral diet for you. And the new version of that book, it's coming out. It's going to be called the Ancestral Autoimmune Protocol. I'm just finishing it up right now. It's now got 4 different diets instead of 3, and it's much more specific around autoimmune disease. That book was me arguing with about 10 different people in my life saying, you should make it for everybody. You should make it for just this group of people. So it's a fun book. It's like 600 pages long and it's got 500 recipes in it. But it's also really hard to be sure what's exactly for autoimmune and what's not, because it's written kind of in the middle for people. Yeah. The new book is a lot more specific, but I would encourage anyone to recognize that an ancestral diet has several different diets in it.
Yeah.
It's not just, go back and eat meat. I mean, it really depends on what you need to tailor it to regulate the physiology of yourself or a patient or, a client if you're working in the gym, because it isn't one diet fits all, because if it did, we'd be doing that already.
I don't know if you know Dr. Chris Masterjohn at all.
Oh yeah.
So we interviewed him just recently, and one of the things he was talking about nonstop was eating liver, like eating different types of offal due to just the amount of stuff you can get from eating offal. Like there's so much that we desire and need nowadays that we can just get if we'll just start eating a bit more from, like you said, nose to tail of the animal.
And actually in Aboriginal culture, growing up in a hunting lodge, the muscle meat was usually dried for winter. The organ meat was like, we got an animal, now we got some real food. We got some muscles for winter.
Wow.
Right? So it's like we got it backwards in the modern world in the sense of what the real important part of the animal is.
How would you guys dry it? Like how would you, because it's obviously a little bit cooler there. What sort of temperatures do you guys have?
Well, anywhere from probably up, I'm thinking in, do you guys do Celsius or?
Yeah, Celsius, degrees Celsius.
Okay, yeah. So for Celsius, like a hot day would be 32 and a cool day would be -20.
Oh, wow. It's crazy. It's almost like that straight shift, 30 to 30.
Well, I mean that's summer to winter. That's not like Tuesday to Wednesday. But...
Not Melbourne. No, yeah. So I mean, here we typically, I mean, recently in more recent years, we've been getting up to like 40s in Brisbane, in Queensland, which is pretty crazy. Where I grew up in the central of Queensland, we'd get like 52 days every once in a while. But I mean, our coldest was only ever like maybe -1, -2. Like we don't get the extremes that you guys get on the other end.
Lived through a storm once that got down to -64.
Whoa.
Yeah, a couple of horses died, but we managed to get through it. But anyway, the way that traditionally you would dry meat for that, it depends on if you're using it to carry it as dry meat or jerky. What do you guys call it down there?
Yeah, jerky or biltong.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, jerky. So the way you do that is basically you would make a miniature sweat lodge and then full of coals and have all the pieces of meat strung up amongst the tree boughs that you have over your coal bed. Mm-hmm. And then you would have little birch bark kind of canoes, strategically placed to catch as much of the fat as you could, because that's like money, or something really valuable to people, right? If you were to do it another way, you would sort of peel back very thin layers of the meat with a really careful kind of cutting strategy, and then you would pound it with a mallet on a log or something in the sun until it would be like hair. And then you would take that and mix it in with the fat in the canoes, the little tiny ones that you had in the sweat lodge for drying meat. Oh man, I'm really messing people up here with imagery. And then you pour the fat into the hair meat with some juniper berries and maybe a couple of other things, and you'd make people call it pemmican. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys have a name for that. One language calls it washna, but I think it's pemmican or pemmican in Canada. But anyway, so that's just basically saturated fat from an animal with pounded meat, with some specific tart berries or medicinal plants that are acrid and have volatile oils to preserve it. And that stuff, I'm not kidding, man. The scientists who've trying to figure it out, it would last 20 years at ambient temperatures and still be edible.
That is crazy.
And that's what people ate in winter, pretty much exclusively, except for the odd rabbit or the odd thing you trap, But up north where I lived, and farther north than that, in it's called the Chilcotin Plateau or the Chilcotin Plateau in British Columbia. Those people would live in pit houses in winter. So you dug down about 5 feet, put a bunch of debris on the bottom, and then you make a little teepee wood hut over top of it, and you spend about 6 months of the winter just sitting in there listening to people talk and fart while you waited for the snow to melt. And you'd have your fire outside and bring in hot rocks, mostly for heat. Yeah. Right. So it's just like a different way of getting through winter. And that's just people would just sit around and talk and sleep and eat, basically meat and fat all winter and go totally keto and try and focus on like the OMAD or one meal a day so everyone would survive.
Wow, that's super interesting. I was just looking at do you think it's because it's a mix of the fat and then also the berries, obviously, that would keep it preserved for so long?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chemistry is super sensible when you get into it. It's like, well, yeah, that would last a long time. Yeah. But, that's what people would eat for months.
That's so cool. It's pretty bizarre. And I love history and I love looking back on, like I said, learning more about how different cultures have kind of come to be and where we've come to now. And I don't know, sometimes I definitely think that many of our ancestors are probably rolling in their graves with how some things have gone, but very happy with how other things have gone, that's for sure. So, what we've dived into a lot here. We really have kind of jumped. I was going to say,
Matt, if you wanted to, Matty, we could do a part 2, and we could just decide to focus on one subject for your listeners.
I feel like that could be really worthwhile.
I'm kind of like a professor of 3 things, so I'm just really into deep dives into the coolest things in the world. So yeah, you really have to train me like a puppy to talk about one thing.
Oh, we've just gone dog training with our pup Prim, so I'll be well trained by the time we get to our next conversation. But that would be really, really appreciated. Maybe to wrap up with what is maybe a question that I haven't asked you around this topics that we have been touching on that maybe we should have touched on, or a subject that we should have touched on that we haven't yet.
You're asking me. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were leading into something.
No,
I was
sorry.
Ooh, what's he gonna ask me? Actually, I have a new website. It's integrativehealthdetective.com.
Okay.
And the only reason I bring that up is if you don't mind getting emails, or you can unsubscribe the next day if you want. But there's a 65-page ebook that's sort of the beginning version of the new book. So it walks people through the ancestral through the autoimmune spectrum, because you and I kind of whizzed through that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes through the protocols with the autoimmune protocol through the 4 different diets.
Perfect.
For each of the autoimmune spectrums. So it's something I give to my patients saying, this is the alphabet of the next 3 months or 2 years of your life. And, please look at that. So I'm sure you guys can grab a copy. But if your listeners want to just get a really clear sense of what's been working at an 85% success rate in my clinic for 25 years, get that ebook. It's free. The new book's coming out probably in the spring, and I don't know. I took some time off, which I rarely ever do, and I sat down to finish that book, and I rewrote it from a completely different place. So I'm really, maybe for the first time, feeling like I finally wrote a book that I really spoke from the center of myself. Because mostly I've been writing like medical textbooks and stuff, which are boring as I don't know, watching koala bears. Oh wait, no, I do have one thing I want to say to your listeners, because I just came up with this metaphor like 2 weeks ago. Sorry, I'm just trying to find
That's all right.
cord here. It's got stuck in my chair. So this is meant to be funny and kind of hard to forget, but and I'm trying to do a drum roll in my head. Don't be a koala.
That's the that's the metaphor.
So that's the beginning of it. Is like, don't be a koala. So this is I'm going to do this as quick as I can, because I don't want to make this too long. But being the nerd that I am, nerd means I read a lot. I don't know if nerd's the same word in Australia, but 25 million years ago, koala bears got lost because of some change in geology, and they went from being kind of bigger badass bears, like polar bear kind of bears, but not the same thing, to these little tree monkey bears that are really slow and stupid. And they live on eucalyptus leaves. And just an FYI, just in case the urban myth is actually from Australia, eucalyptus leaves don't make koala bears high. Because some people have, like, that's an urban myth, at least in Canada, that koala bears are really slow and sleepy and stoned because they eat eucalyptus leaves and they make them high. That's not actually true. But what is true is they're living basically on lettuce. And they've been living on lettuce for about 25 million years. So they went from being a big badass bear to these little tiny dog-sized bears that are really, really slow and have very minimal calories day to day. So they learn to conserve their energy. But the real kind of crux of the story is their brains are less than half the size they used to be. And the most important thing you can do to prevent aging and to improve neuroplasticity, to improve sleep and overall just resilience to stress is complex movement. Because that's what koala bears lost, was complex movement. And if you don't need it, nature is really efficient. She'll just take away half your brain. Oh, you're not using that right now? Well, we'll just put that in the bin for, a million years from now, just in case you need it. So when you're trying to get your life back and your mind back and your sense of self back and your kind of what I call the eye of your hurricane, don't be a koala. Do Tai Chi, do Qigong, pick up some weights, learn to dance, learn to, roll on the floor and pretend you're some kind of animal. But until you're actually moving in multiple different directions and playing with balance and different quadrants of dexterity and what's called proprioception, your brain is shrinking. And the best time to do that stuff is in the first 45 minutes of the day. Because neuroplasticity maxes in the morning. And if you do the same routine as every day, your neuroplasticity shuts off because you're hibernating. Right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to, you get up and you go to the bathroom, you go to the kitchen, you go to your car, you go to your office, your brain is on automatic. And maybe that's one of the reasons why you banged into that guy on the highway, is your brain was just, going into automatic mode, and it didn't feel, being tired as you were, that you needed to be alert, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really dangerous thing, because if you're looking to hibernate, wouldn't alcohol make that better? Wouldn't a pizza and some beer and a bag of donuts make that better, or some candies and stuff, or whatever else you might be into? So if you want to get your life back, learn to move and make it complex and fun, and to music if you want, and get into breath work. Because once you start moving like an animal, you reawaken the horse, and then you can reawaken your cowboy, and then you can look through your binoculars and really know where you're going. But it all starts with movement and really re-identifying with your body as you instead of what you think about.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. It's a good way to finish the podcast up. So let's just maybe just throw out some of the best places for people to follow along. I'll link to your websites, but in regards to socials, whereabouts can they follow you there?
I'm on Facebook, I guess. There's Integrative Health Solutions, which old name, same channel. Then there's me, Michael Smith, but there's only 2 billion of us, so maybe Michael Smith, Nelson, BC doctor might find me if you're looking for me on Facebook. I'm just learning how Instagram works. And I love you guys' page, by the way. Who did your page?
Thank you. I can give you all of his details once we're finished.
Oh, I would love that.
Metcon Collection.
Anyway, Yeah, just because I was like, wow, how did they do that? Because I'm just getting started, but my handle on Instagram is ancestral _ AIP. Ancestral line AIP. I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah.
And I don't really have any understanding of Twitter yet, so I'm hoping someone's going to help me understand what that is.
It's not really a thing here in Australia. Oh, it is, but not many people use it in Australia. It really never took off. It's quite bizarre how the States absolutely love it, but yeah, not many Australians really looked after it that much. Like LinkedIn's definitely becoming a bit of a thing over here for business, but outside of that, it seems Instagram and Facebook are the big wins.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn too. I just haven't really spent time using it. Yeah, but Twitter isn't near as big in Canada either. At least where I live. But those are the places you can get a hold of me. I do have a different website though. So there's the integrativehealthdetective.com website. That's for clinical medicine.
Yep.
Like, if you're like, I need to talk to this guy because I have something really hard to pronounce. If you're focused more on addiction and trauma, then the website is somaticmindfulness.org.
Perfect.
And that's where I either work with people one-on-one as kind of a therapist or, something like a therapist. Or there's courses on there, like there's a somatic mindfulness Qigong course coming up in about 3 weeks. That's 3 months long for people who want to like deep dive into breathwork and Qigong and mindfulness and trauma release stuff. Yeah. And then the same course turns into a 1-year intensive training for people who want to become Qigong teachers. Okay. So if you're really wanting to get into mind-body medicine and you're not really sure how to access all of that stuff, I've got all kinds of online stuff for that, because that's my happy places, like Qigong, martial arts, authentic movement and breath work, because I'm an animal, I admit it.
The somatic mindfulness process was something that I wanted to dive into that we didn't touch on, so maybe that's what our whole next podcast can be based around. That could be really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's been really insightful, and I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matty, and high five to you guys on your kid.
Thank you.
And what you're doing with your business, and I really hope you get that retreat center going, man, because now that gives me an excuse to come down under and see what it's all about.
Love that. Would love that. Visit thechieflife.com for all of your nutrition coaching needs, your own personalized meal plan, as well as how you can get involved with one of our 7-pillar retreats.